I also have a medical practice, which is my main job. So I'm a medical doctor by training, but I'm an entrepreneur as well, and I've worked with over 50 companies in the last decade, including many companies in the continuous glucose monitor space. So I was one of the first doctors to use CGM on healthy people in 2014. And the last talk was great because he actually kind of primed me for this talk, which is how do you actually track all of these things in our lifestyle that really matter to aging? How do you track the effects of your environment, your food, your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise, and even your stress on your body? And to me, what I discovered is that blood sugar monitoring is actually one of the greatest tools you can put on your body to actually see in real time the effects of your lifestyle and how you're adapting to the world around you. So I love first principles, and I got really obsessed with energy because, to me, I feel like we're moving away from this fundamental Western materialist paradigm to more of a holistic vision of how health can be perceived through the lens of energy metabolism. And so in my personal philosophy, you need ample energy to adapt to the world around you and to thrive. And when people start losing energy capacity, that's when we start seeing disease emerge. So basically the core of what I do with clients is I focus on their energy metabolism, focus on their relationships, and I focus on how they are integrating their purpose into their life. Obviously, we're in a metabolic energy crisis. Like, we've got massive rates of obesity, diabetes, and fundamentally, insulin resistance is underlying a lot of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and dementia. So when your energy metabolism starts to get deranged and you start getting prediabetes, you start getting insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, these diseases are preceding these massive chronic illnesses. So that's why I got so obsessed with metabolism, is because I was like, if insulin resistance is fundamentally underlying a lot of chronic illness, how do we actually, in real time, monitor our ability to adapt and to actually maintain healthy blood sugar? So I got really obsessed with like energy. So where do we get energy from? We get it from our food, we get it from our air, we get it from the water, we get it from grounding our feet into the ground, we get it from sunlight. Like, we can actually capture electrons through our environment, and that's how we create energy, is we harness electrons. And we throw those electrons down the electron transport chain that powers a hydrogen turbine called ATPase. And that creates an electrochemical gradient that creates membrane potential, membrane polarity. So every cell membrane, every mitochondrial membrane is a battery and a capacitor. So you have to understand that each one of your cells is literally fundamentally a physics equation, okay? And so if you have a broken mitochondria, you are gonna have broken metabolism. If you have broken metabolism, you're gonna get disease. Not complicated. So voltage is healing. This is a theory based on this doctor in Texas named Jeffrey Tennant. But to me, this actually really manifests a lot in my clients. I see people all the time with chronic fatigue, with chronic illness, and fundamentally, they have issues with mitochondrial function. So I can't even honestly explain every one of my slides because I've got 30 of them, so I'm gonna go fly through them. But in my practice, I'm always looking at how is a person's energy production and energy use being manifest. So there's energy delivery systems and there's energy demand. And when you have more energy than you need, you have well-being. When you have less energy than you need, you feel broke, right? So think about your ATP like a bank, like money in a bank account. If you are running on low, like let's say your bank account started to get like, let's say it was cut in half, you'd start freaking out a little bit, right? You couldn't afford maybe your rent or something. So basically, this woman, Amy Hill, she wrote a book called Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. It's mitochondria, not hypochondria. And in 2019, I was studying chronic fatigue because I was really curious. I was like, why do people get chronic fatigue, and how do we fix it? And I started studying viruses, and I started studying intracellular infections, and I discovered that through this woman that basically when infections get inside the cell, they usually are able to do that through low energy availability. When someone has low energy state, and they're more at risk for getting infections. But then those infections hijack the metabolism, and that can lead to a person manifesting chronic illness. And so when COVID came along, I was like, oh, that's really funny. I've been studying viruses, and it was really interesting because before COVID, people didn't really think chronic fatigue syndrome was real. And now we're all in full belief that this is real, right? It's mitochondrial dysfunction. These viruses, they hijack your metabolic machinery. They harness their energy, your energy for their own uses, and then you start feeling like crap. So, hold on. So this slide is really important because the old model is that there's something wrong with your genes. And don't get me wrong, there are rare diseases and these will 100% cause illness, but that's not the majority of what people are dealing with in America. The majority of what people are dealing with in America is not broken genetics. It's genetics that is not in alignment with the environment that they're living in. Your genetics are not designed for food available all the time and sitting all day long in front of a computer with no sunlight. That is not how you were designed. So the new paradigm is that when your mitochondria and your energy metabolism system start to break down, disease emerges. And so basically, the new model is there's not enough bioenergetic capacity to maintain the integrity of the structure. So what causes mitochondrial dysfunction? A lot of things: sedentary lifestyles, genetic mutations, environmental toxins, infections, increased reactive oxygen species, poor metabolic health, overnutrition, aging, chronic stress, and I forgot to add this, immune system dysregulation. So there's a lot of things driving mitochondrial dysfunction, which is why I'm going to go one more up. Hold on, sorry. Which is why when basically you're trying to actually measure what's going on with mitochondrial dysfunction, you have to look at a lot of different things. Now, do I measure all of these things in my patients? No, I'm not measuring all these on every single patient. But I wanted to share with you the way that I'm thinking about the body and looking at cellular health and looking at organ system health and looking at behavioral health and actually looking at the methylation cycle, the oxidative stress markers, inflammatory markers, the immune system, the mitochondria, the cell membrane, the infections, the brain function, the liver function, the gut function, the hormones, the lungs, the heart, metabolism, sleep, movement, body composition, and emotions. Like, you can't just look at only mitochondria from like the CGM. But today we're going to talk about CGM because it's the most practical thing that a consumer can do without the aid of a doctor to actually learn to optimize their health. So basically this slide is important because it shows you that the more healthy mitochondria you have, more functioning and healthy, and the greater capacity you have to handle stress. So when people experience stress and they have low energy availability and low energy capacity, they break more quickly. Think about like a video game character with like 3 bars versus 1 bar. If you have 1 bar and you get hit, you're gonna break and you're gonna lose the life, right? Not mean that we won't die in real life, but you get what I'm talking about. And then on this side, this is basically how each different type of tissue manifests with energy deficiency or decline in organ reserve. I wish I could give an entire talk on this slide, but you'll just have to get my talk from me if you message me on Instagram or LinkedIn or X, because I'm happy to send you all these links because these papers are really worth reading. They're quite informative. So CGM, now the fun part. How many people here have worn a CGM? Amazing. How many people who actually know how to interpret it? Okay, like maybe half the group. It's really tricky, and I actually was one of the first advisors of Levels, and I technically co-founded NutriSense, but we won't get into the details. But basically, I've been working in CGM for like a decade, and I love this tool because this tool is the best way that you as a consumer can actually really, truly optimize your health without the aid of a doctor. I was obsessed with these in 2014 because the first time I put it on, I was borderline pre-diabetic, and I was freaking out, right? Because here I am trying to be a longevity doctor. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm borderline pre-diabetic. And I was like, holy crap, what am I going to do? So I started using CGM, and this was my main tool to actually identify what were the lifestyle interventions that I was enacting actually doing something. And so really importantly is you need to know what healthy ranges are. So I would recommend if you do use a CGM to take a picture of the slide, because what doctors tell you is healthy is not necessarily what is truly healthy. It took me a lot of digging into the literature to figure out what actually were healthy normal ranges. Most doctors will say as long as you're less than 100 fasting glucose and as long as you're less than 140 postprandial glucose, post-meal glucose, you're fine. But actually that's not true. Oh, and by the way, if you want to get a CGM, guess what? This is the first year that we now have over-the-counter CGM from Dexcom and Abbott. I prefer the Stilo, but they're both great. And I'm just really stoked that this is available to consumers because this is a big deal for society because now we don't have to actually pay a company to give us a prescription. So this is why this really matters. So even if prediabetes is greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter, if you get to like 110 milligrams per deciliter, which by the way, I've had clients who've had doctors let them be at that state for years. And they don't even know that if you actually increase your cancer risk if your fasting glucose is greater than 110. And your diabetes diagnosis is once you get to 126 fasting glucose. So my aim is that most of my clients are less than 90. That's what I go for. Now, post-meal glucose, I know you may not know this, but damage to large blood vessels starts to occur at greater than 135. And damage to small blood vessels starts to occur at greater than 160. Now, as long as you're not spiking on a consistent basis this high, you're okay. And one single spike is not going to kill you, but it's actually the number. It's like consistently spiking your blood sugar has direct effects on mitochondria. It produces advanced glycation end products. It depletes antioxidants. It leads to more reactive oxygen species. So basically, every time you get a blood sugar spike, you're releasing a little bit of exhaust fumes in your cells. So think about your cells like little engines. When they get overheated, think about it like inflammation, right? When they get too much exhaust, that's what reactive oxygen species is doing. It's like you're literally puffing smoke into your cells. So this is the way that I try to teach my clients how to read the blood sugar curve. There's the fasting glucose. There's the peak post-meal glucose. You can basically give yourself a glucose test with a predetermined amount of glucose or a predetermined food to see like how does this specific food affect me. Glycemic variability, meal timing, and meal episodes. And then we're going to talk about other things that change insulin sensitivity that would not necessarily be directly seen immediately with a glucose curve. So first and foremost, fasting glucose. So basically, as you can tell above, this person is around like 100 on a regular basis. And through lifestyle changes, through stopping eating sugar and flour, they were working out, they lost weight, they corrected their vitamin D, magnesium, and macronutrient deficiencies. They experimented with ketosis, intermittent and prolonged fasting. They dropped their glucose to 85, and this was from 100 to 85. So you don't need to do all those necessarily at once. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that by experimenting with different interventions, you can actually change your numbers. And you can actually see your body improving in real time. So I used to be really into fasting. Now I do a lot less than I did when I was first learning about fasting, because as a premenopausal woman, you actually do need to be careful with too much fasting because it can affect fertility. But that being said, the vast majority of people are eating too much and too often. And so you have glycogen in your cells and your muscles and your liver. And you're largely speaking, what I discovered was that your fasting blood sugar is highly dependent on your liver insulin sensitivity. And so one of the best ways to improve liver insulin sensitivity is by fasting, because it literally drains the glycogen out of your cells. So when you do a 24-hour fast, you're basically eating almost all of your glycogen and finally tapping into your fat stores. And that builds metabolic flexibility. So do you need to fast a lot all the time? No. But like a 24-hour fast once every 2 weeks, anybody can do that. That is not something that's difficult. Anyone can do that. So then there's peak post-meal glucose. And this is an important one because basically every time you spike your blood sugar, you're releasing a large amount of insulin. And the more that you spike, the more insulin that gets released. And the more that happens, the more the beta cells are being taxed, right? They're actually it's stressing them to actually have to release so much insulin. So the body, when it starts getting these signals, it starts to release more and more insulin. So even if I don't see big spikes on a person's blood sugar CGM, if I measure their fasting insulin, I can actually see if a person's starting to develop metabolic issues, because you can see when someone's insulin starts to go up that they're losing the ability to regulate effectively. So very importantly is fast food and processed foods are one of the biggest culprits because they are a highly refined, fiber-free form of carbohydrate, and especially liquid carbs like sugar and soda and even juice that they're serving here. Those juices in the fridge, those are going to spike you. Like a sedentary person can only consume about 40 grams of carbs and be able to actually properly dispose of that. So if you're eating over 40 grams of carbs in a meal, which a bagel is easily over 40 grams of carbs, a big one, you're going to see a blood sugar spike and you're going to see a big amount of insulin. So this is a really controversial topic, right? Like, what kind of diet should you eat to lower your blood sugar? And what I discovered in my research is that people tend to go one way or the other. They tend to go keto or they tend to go high carb, like actually there are people that literally go out with prediabetes and diabetes and they go on a high carb, low fat diet. And the fascinating thing is that both of these work to lower blood sugar. Do you guys know why? Well, when you eat high fat, low carb, you're basically lowering insulin output, right? But when you eat high carb, low fat, you're improving insulin sensitivity. So both of these can work. But what I've basically found is that there's a few different types of diets. There's basically the low fat, which is mostly vegetarian vegans, and then there's the Mediterranean and the sort of zone people, and then there's the Atkins, paleo, carnivore, keto people, right? So it's like a whole spectrum of macronutrient ratios. But what I typically discover in my practice is that people get stuck on one end of the spectrum or the other. They don't seem to want to go to the middle, where Mediterranean obviously does reign supreme. And what I found is that if you move a person around this spectrum, if like they're not really thriving on a ketogenic diet or they're not really thriving on a vegan diet, and you bring them closer to center or you bring them even to the other side, you can often see an improvement in their blood sugar. So don't get stuck in a dietary dogma. Experiment and see what works for you, because actually the most important thing is that both of these diets remove processed food, are based on whole foods, and avoid overeat. You avoid overeating, and people can adapt to variable food supplies. So the goal is to get you on the kind of diet that is mostly whole food that you are going to stick to. That is crucial. That is really the key. And typically when people have rules-based systems, they tend to stick with it more effectively. But the real goal is building metabolic flexibility. So metabolic flexibility and this is the problem with getting stuck on high carb, low fat, or low carb, high fat, is you become metabolically and flexible on both of those ends. You actually want to be able to undulate your carbs throughout the week to actually build the ability to metabolize fats or carbs depending on what you're being fed. That is a mark of true healthy metabolism, is not being metabolically inflexible. It's actually having the flexibility to metabolize carbs or fats. I like this. I am an advisor of Lumen, but they do a device that measures your respiratory quotient. So you can actually see how metabolically flexible you are in real time and which kinds of carbohydrates or whether you're burning carbs or fats. So this is a great example of what I would give a client who's trying to build metabolic flexibility. And it's a program where you basically change up your macros, you change up your calories, and you change up your fitness depending on different days. And certain days you're going to be low carb, certain days you're going to be high carb. The days where you're doing heavy lifting, you're going to be higher carb. The days where you're going to be doing a little bit of HIIT, like 10 to 20 minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes of HIIT, that's when you're going to be low carb. And the goal is to actually get your body to adapt to different demands. And then once a week you do a feast day, and then the other week you'll do a fast day. So I would take a picture of this because this is really, really a simple way to learn how to build metabolic flexibility, and it's not rocket science. If you're trying to lose weight, you calculate your basal metabolic rate and then your total daily energy expenditure, and then you figure out the percentage that you're trying to cut or maybe gain, and then that's your daily calories, and then you adjust your macros based on that. Okay, so then other strategies to lower postprandial glucose. This is, I'm sure everyone's heard of the Glucose Goddess's book. She's basically outlined 10 strategies. I was doing this before I met her, but I do like her stuff a lot. But basically, some of the biggest strategies to lower postprandial blood glucose are eat your starchy carbs last and veggies first. Know which food processing liberates more starch, raw versus cooked, cooked versus cooked and cooled. Don't eat carbs alone. Watch out for gluten-free and sugar-free foods. Avoid artificial sugars and regular sugar. Because artificial sugars, a lot of them do cause dysbiosis. Overeating does cause reactive oxygen species, so don't overeat. Listen to the Japanese. Eat only till you're 80% full. Apple cider vinegar before meals improves metabolic health, and then exercise before or after meals, and build more muscle, because muscle is a glucose sink. So the more muscle you build, the more you can handle blood sugar. Exercise improves whole body insulin sensitivity. When you're exercising, you don't even need insulin to consume to metabolize carbs. So everyone does need to exercise. It's really, really crucial. There's a great book that's by Rob Wolf, and it's like the 7-day carb test. And basically, it's like testing how you are adapting to different carbs, because different carbs are going to affect different people. One person in this audience might eat a banana, and the other person eats one, and they have a massive blood sugar spike. If I eat like a ton of blueberries, I get a huge blood sugar spike. But if I eat a ton of raspberries, I don't. So I do recommend experimenting with CGM to see which carbs do cause you the biggest issues. And when you eat those carbs, make sure that they're the last carb that you eat as part of a meal. So I really hate the oral glucose tolerance test. I think it's an abomination in medicine to give people 75 grams of liquid carbs, and it should be banned. But that's still a test that you get in medicine, and it's even given to pregnant women to test for gestational diabetes. But I would personally recommend against it and just doing your own carb tests at home. And so glycemic variability, this is a really important thing that people don't really think enough about. But when you use a CGM and you start seeing your lines get really crazy, you're stressed. And this is the opposite of heart rate variability, where you want heart rate variability to be high. You want glycemic variability to be low, because glycemic variability is a marker of how well you are adapting to your life. And I have found that this tends to be more crazy when people are really stressed. So if you see your blood sugar curve going nuts, you need to look at your HRV, your resting heart rate, and actually your sleep, and be like, okay, am I under like a lot of stress? Do I need to pause and maybe take a break? Basically, glycemic variability leads to free radical production, advanced glycation end products, inflammatory mediators, all which contribute to beta cell and endothelial dysfunction, which you do not want to age. This is just some examples of how certain things like HIIT training will cause a blood sugar spike on occasion. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do HIIT training. It just means that you should be aware that it's going to liberate a lot of glucose. But I wouldn't go over 90 minutes of high intensity exercise a week. There is evidence that that will actually degrade mitochondrial health, whereas there's no amount of moderate exercise that's too much, turns out, according to the literature. Just the high intensity exercise is what can be really problematic for mitochondrial function. But stress can directly affect your ability to metabolize sugar, because cortisol is a glucocorticoid, which means it liberates glucose. And you're adapted to this because this would have gotten you out of danger in primitive times. So stress is not bad, just too much stress and chronic stress does cause blood sugar issues. And mitochondria are fundamental to literally transducing stress signals, because the outer mitochondrial membrane has enzymes that metabolize norepinephrine and epinephrine, and the mitochondria themselves metabolize cortisol. So fundamentally, mitochondria are literally transducing psychosocial stressors into physiologic signals and releasing hormones as a result. And this is also really important because they play a role in sex hormone production. So your cells are always trying to decide, am I in peacetime metabolism or am I wartime metabolism? And if you're in wartime metabolism, usually you prioritize more cortisol production than sex hormone production. And that can actually ruin people's sex hormones, which is very problematic. And as women age, in particular, as women are going through perimenopause and menopause, lower estrogen levels actually reduce insulin sensitivity. So I do see a lot of women in perimenopause who just giving them a touch of hormones will improve insulin sensitivity pretty dramatically. And then there's meal timing. So if you eat really late at night, not ideal for metabolism, terrible for CGM, for heart rate variability, it's terrible for sleep. So stop eating around 5 or 6 p.m. Like, do not eat late at night. It is not good for you. It is bad for your metabolism. So try to limit late night eating. Basically, altered sleep timing, like shift work, altered food and sleep timing, like travel and jet lag, and altered food timing, eating really late at night. All of these cause circadian misalignment. And this is really, really important for optimal metabolic health. So try to actually eat on a consistent meal schedule. It's really clear that circadian asynchrony impairs glucose homeostasis. So the last thing I'll say is meal frequency. So most people are eating too often, I would say. And someone asked me earlier, like, well, I don't really feel well if I eat big meals, and then or if I skip meals, then I feel really hungry, and then I just eat a lot of food. But typically, if someone has to eat all day long consistently, they're usually not metabolically flexible, and so they're constantly kind of riding the glycemic roller coaster. So the goal is building metabolic flexibility so you don't have to eat all day long, because most adults don't need more than 2 meals a day. And my friend Sim Land, who spoke yesterday, he eats 1 meal a day and a big, big, big meal. So basically, the goal is preferably eat like 2 meals a day and maybe a snack in between those meals. And then I would recommend doing a little bit of intermittent fasting. Unless you're trying to get pregnant, then I would avoid too much intermittent fasting. But generally speaking, the optimal health zone is low energy intake and meal frequency, leading to better insulin sensitivity, lower blood pressure, lower body temperature, as was discussed in the previous talk. People are just eating too much food, and your mitochondria are literally burning that food and aging you. So the less often you eat, the more you can preserve mitochondrial function. So it's not all just about glucose. Obviously, you need to check your insulin levels, because the higher your insulin goes, the more insulin resistance you're developing. I do recommend insulin levels around 5 to 6. And then when I went from Israel to Lebanon once, Lebanon was burning garbage. The air was totally horrible, and my blood sugar went up 10 points in a week, and it was stayed 10 points higher. So air quality does matter. Environmental toxins does make a difference. And if you want to find me and get this talk, follow me on Instagram at drmolly.co. I've got a couple courses. I used to teach at Stanford, so Your Healthspan Journey was my Stanford course, all about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. And you can find me on LinkedIn. And I wrote the book, The Spark Factor, that's really all about what I just talked about, is how do you biohack health? And I'd love to take any questions, and hope you enjoyed the talk.
All right, thank you so much. We have room for some questions. We pushed the schedule out by about 15 minutes, so we have some extra time. So yeah, let's start with questions.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Maybe my case is an N of 1, but I did 24-hour fasting, and I was wearing the GCM, and I became insulin resistant for like 2 days because my sugar would not go down. Is this something common?
I would say that when you fast and you're seeing paradoxical effects on blood sugar, you're probably under more stress than you realize, and you shouldn't be fasting to begin with, because cortisol dysregulation and fasting do not mix. Like, if you have low cortisol levels to begin with, which you may not even know you do have low cortisol levels, and you fast, that is a massive stressor on the system. So I do only recommend fasting for people that have healthy cortisol and people that are not under significant high stress, because it can be a major stressor. And you have a certain amount of stress you can fit in a stress cup, right? Until it overflows. That's called allostatic overload. So my suggestion for you is you might have experienced allostatic overload and that paradoxical effect of higher blood sugar for 2 days.
Awesome.
Hi, hello. I don't know if you have data on pregnant women, because I monitored my glucose when I was pregnant, and obviously I was the only biohacker in my town doing this while pregnant, and my doctors thought that it was completely wrong. Like the data I was bringing was not right, because I was constantly in a hypoglycemia, like around 50. Yeah. So, and I tried to find literature, and nobody found anything. I didn't find anything, so I don't know if you have something specific or recommendations, or someone who has tested that, because I didn't figure out data on that.
I only hear about people with hyperglycemia in pregnancy, but I definitely haven't done a ton of research. The reality is we do not have enough clinical research on women or pregnant women, because like most clinical researchers don't even want to touch it, because they're like, oh, there's hormones. So I'm so sorry. I really wish I could understand that. I think that's actually really fascinating. And did you change your diet?
Absolutely not, and I was feeling great. My doctor was like, "This is literally impossible. You should be like in the hospital, like right now."
You know,
I'm feeling great,
my guess is that you're actually pretty metabolically flexible, and that you were just burning fat, and you were just in ketosis. And so, unless you were actually measuring ketones, you don't really know what you're burning. So, continuous ketone monitors will certainly come, but we're not there yet. But once we have the ability to monitor cortisol, ketones, and blood sugar at the same time, it's going to make CGM even like 10x more valuable. But right now, we're not there.
Okay, we'll have a few more questions. Just for the person asking the question, please give your name and just a one-sentence introduction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Molly. I'm Ashish, and I help people live a healthy, long life, so this is incredible. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions. One, I wanted to ask you, we hear a lot about lactate threshold training or zone 2 training with mitochondria function. So have you seen, and what is your thought around that? And second, is there a test or a way to check for mitochondria efficiency, or how well your mitochondria is?
Yeah. Okay, so first off, I was doing like mostly weight training last year, and then I was like, I really want to like lose a few more pounds. So I started rucking and doing zone 2 training with like 15-pound weight on my back. And it was amazing how fast the weight came off. Like, it was like bananas. Like, I was only rucking like maybe 45 minutes a week. So I'm a big believer in fasted zone 2 training, because your heart rate's low, you're not really stressing the system. Women in general need to be a little bit more careful with fasted exercise. You probably shouldn't exercise fasted, but just eat like 150 calories or something if you're a woman. But generally speaking, fasted, or just generally speaking, zone 2 training is fantastic for metabolic health. It's also fantastic for heart rate variability, which are 2 important markers. And I have another 30 slides to this talk that's literally just on HRV. So next time I'll give that talk too. Oh, the second question was, how do you measure mitochondria? I'm an advisor of a company called Versea Health, and they have a product called the Me Screen test, and it's one of the few tools in actually measuring the effects of your cellular microenvironment on a pre-cultured muscle cell. So they use as the same muscle cell to run all the tests. And that's the sort of control, right? It's that muscle cell. And what they're doing is they're incubating it in your blood serum, and they're seeing how your cellular microenvironment is going to affect that pre-cultured muscle cell. Now, is it your mitochondria? No. But it's going to give you mitochondrial efficiency. It's going to give you reactive oxygen species. It's going to give you all these markers. They're very early, and I'm constantly giving them feedback on how upset I am at that their test results have certain things missing that I wish they had. But they do take my advice, and they're going to be, I'd say they're going to be good in about 6 months. But because right now I think it's too expensive, and I think their test results need to be improved. But I do say there's a lot of hope for that company. And then I just don't want to waste your money because I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it's going to get there. And then also there's companies called Genova Diagnostics that does a NutriVal that you can look at your Krebs cycle, and it's through urine organic acids. And then the company Therium also will give you a lot of data on your mitochondrial function.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a longevity enthusiast. Have been exploring the space for the last 7 years. I have 2 questions that are related. One is metabolic flexibility.
Sure.
What's the best way to think of metabolic flexibility? And to me, it's like the ability of the body to switch between different sources,
Yeah.
which would suggest that you need to consume different sort of variations of diet and not necessarily be on one end of the spectrum as
Exactly.
where we're getting pushed. And the second question that is, what is your view on 1 meal a day? So I've been on 1 meal a day for about 5 years, and like logically, one would conclude that it's potentially worse for metabolic flexibility to be on 1 meal a day because you're not getting nutrients.
I mean, look, I think for men, I've seen, generally speaking, men do it better than women. Women's don't. I mean, so I know women that do 1 meal a day, but generally speaking, most of them are like menopausal. Premenopausal women are more sensitive to the effects of food deprivation and stress because their bodies are designed to make babies, whether they have them or not. And so I do see that men thrive more on the 1 meal a day, but I don't really recommend it across the board for women just because of fertility reasons. And then metabolic flexibility, the way I kind of describe it is like your cells have hybrid engines. So you're either running on battery power or you're running on gas. And carbs are basically gas. And carbs are not bad. And I actually don't even believe gas is totally terrible. But the goal is not to be only running on gas because you want to be using your battery power too. And you want to be able to tap into your fat stores. So I had a friend who was running a marathon and she had only trained for like a week. Her other friend had trained for 6 months. Her other friend was eating carbs every day, all day long. My friend, literally over the course of a month of working with me, she basically learned how to use CGM and learned metabolic flexibility training. And her friend who'd been eating carbs all day long bonked during the race because she ran out of glycogen and she couldn't hit her fat stores because she wasn't metabolically flexible. Whereas my friend finished the race in like record time. So metabolic flexibility is a crucial marker. Yeah, but I wouldn't say ketosis is like the best. There are athletes that do train in ketosis, but there's a lot of evidence that it's actually not great for athletic outcomes. Like the very, very small percentage of people that thrive on a ketogenic diet in fitness. Dom D'Agostino would be one of them, which she's a friend, by the way.
Thank you, Dr. Molly. My name is William. I'm coming from a bioengineering background. I started to optimize for metabolic flexibility about a year ago.
Yeah.
And so I've been swapping between keto, like high fat, low carb, and just the other more traditional diet of high carb, low fat. And I've been swapping on time intervals, mostly by feel.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the best way to optimize, like how long I'm doing a keto phase versus how long I'm doing a carb phase?
I mean, I really do believe in intuitive eating, believe it or not, even though this is highly, like, not necessarily intuitive. But what I think CGM does give you is that intuition. Like, once you've used this enough, you start knowing what it feels like to be in ketosis. You start knowing what it feels like to have a high blood sugar spike. Like, you know what it feels like, right? Like, you can feel it. And, like, so I think that for men can tolerate longer periods of ketosis, it seems. Women can, but like, again, I think women have to be really careful with their fertility. And so you don't want to send too many famine signals because that will tell the body that it's under stress and there's maybe not enough food available to make a person. So you got to be thinking about first principles. Like, we are supposed to be living on the savannah or in the forest, wandering around all day long, hunting and gathering, or maybe being agrarian. And now we're nowhere near that. So the goal is to actually try to build a lifestyle that can work with your existing primitive metabolism, so that you're thriving. And so the first thing I would say is, how are you sleeping? You know, like a little bit of fasting is going to affect your sleep. But if you are, like, for example, the guy who fasted for 2 days and had that paradoxical effect on blood sugar, the first question is, how do you feel after that? Like, if you're not feeling well on your program, you need to make a change. So that's the number one thing, is like, what do I feel like when I wake up? Do I have vitality? Do I have energy? Can I think straight? Do I have mental clarity? Or am I feeling slow and sluggish, tired, hungry, constantly craving carbs? Like, that's a sign that you're leaning in the wrong direction. So energy, how does your mind function? How does your body function? Do you have enough energy to meet your demands? Something's off if you're feeling exhausted on a regular basis, right? And again, I gave you a whole list of other biomarkers to look at besides CGM. So like, CGM is not the only thing that I use, but it is the most useful, practical consumer tool. And also, I do recommend wearing an Aura and actually seeing how your fitness, your sleep, and your stress are affecting your blood sugar too. And Aura is actually going to integrate with CGM this year, I believe. So it's exciting.
Awesome. One more question.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. My name is Sanjay Schweig. I'm the founder of the California Center for Functional Medicine, and loving this conference. Quick question. How do you deal with the variability on CGMs from device to device? And also, do you
such a pain.
recommend that people spot check with finger stick?
Yes. Okay. First of all, great question. So I have found that CGMs are notoriously finicky still. So I found about 1 in 20 of them is just wildly inaccurate. And that's insane, right? Like so what they do, I've worked in the hardware space of CGM, so I know a lot about how they work, but they're trying to calibrate a bunch of them at the same time. And unfortunately, like, there's going to be problems with hardware, right? If they're not perfect. So I do recommend, this is why I do recommend more of the Dexcoms, because you can calibrate the Dexcoms. I don't think you can calibrate the Abbotts as easily. But it's really, really, really crucial for you to know if you're seeing really wild aberrations, like you're seeing, like, for example, maybe you're at 50 every single day, and then you do a finger stick and you're actually at like 85. That CGM is garbage. Like, you need to, and the thing is, you actually can contact the company and they will give you a new one, but nobody does it because nobody complains. But it is a really big problem in this space. Like, these, I do recommend everyone have a finger stick monitor, because also, if you're seeing really, really high numbers, and it's not that high, you might be thinking, oh my God, my diet's terrible, my lifestyle is awful. And it's actually nothing to do with you. It's the error. So thank you for mentioning that, because it is an issue. And and finger stick monitors are kind of a crucial tool to definitively know whether or not you can trust it.
I just want to say that it seems like we could do questions on this all day. Dr. Molly will be on a fireside also in about 25 minutes, so we could take a few more questions for the audience.
Thank you.
I'll selfishly ask one thing very quickly, which is time over the curve. What matters more, how many spikes you have, or how much time over the curve, or is there some relationship between those two?
I would say if there's two people and one person is getting one big spike at like 180, but that's the only spike they had once like that day, whereas another person is like spiking at like 160 and they're staying there for 3 hours and then they're going down. That person at 160 is a much bigger problem because it's actually the area under the curve. But every single one of those spikes, if you're doing that over the course of a year, that is going to contribute again to reactive oxygen species and advanced glycation end products, and it is going to affect the cell. But the goal is to minimize both, but not to be a total maniac. Like, the reality is that you're going to go through periods of time in your life where stress is just going to hit you like a brick, and there's going to be things out of your control. And if you put a CGM on during like a crisis moment in your life and you see everything's haywire, your job is not to continue to freak out about your fact that your life is like affecting your cell. You got to focus on just what's really acute in that moment. But that being said, the great thing about the CGM is that it's going to show you, oh my God, my stress levels and my lifestyle are starting to really creep up on me. And oh my gosh, I actually need to make some big life changes. And I went through periods of time where I didn't use CGM, and because I was like really questioning, like, should I really be this obsessed? And to be entirely honest with you, when I started putting it back on again, like, it really does make a great impact on your health because of the accountability. You can't lie to yourself if you see data in front of you. And so I really am a big believer in it, because I think that you want to be looking at those spikes, and you want to be looking at how much you are spiking and how often you're spiking and how much you are, how much your fasting blood sugar is sort of rising over the years, because you can actually reverse metabolic disease if you catch it early. But if you end up with diabetes, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get back into the healthy range. It's going to be a lot harder. You can, but the best thing is to catch it in pre-diabetes state and then go backwards, versus once you're at diabetes, you've already lost half of your beta cell function, guys. Half. Like, that's it. And so you're not getting that back unless you do like stem cells.
All right, thank you very
Thanks.
much. To be continued. Thank you, Dr. Molly Maloof.